so much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you and good evening, everyone. Thank you for that warm welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you here at this final keynote dinner. I'm going to bring it down. Okay. Thank you so much. I know that you all have had quite a conference this week of outstanding events, fascinating speakers, commemorating the outstanding work of this organization. But I want you to know that when an organization as esteemed and as respected and as hardworking as LULAC invites me to share one of their most important events, it truly means a lot to me. And so I thank you for letting me be here with you this evening. This is indeed an outstanding, outstanding group. And I know that you all have had a very full docket this week. And of course, it seems as if the docket of the world is full at this time. I know that many of us are thinking about the devastating attack in Nice, in France. I know that all of our thoughts and our prayers are with those lost and wounded and the loved ones of those lost and wounded. We are reaching out to our French counterparts to offer any assistance. And of course, we are also monitoring the ongoing situation in Turkey. Yet, when I took office shortly over a year ago, I outlined several priorities for my tenure as Attorney General. Obviously, national security and terrorism, for the reasons that we see sadly around us, cybersecurity, the protection of vulnerable victims, and also the improvement of this relationship. And my first day in office, my first day, was the day of Freddie Gray's funeral, and Baltimore saw violence that very night. So this issue has been with me, but more importantly, it has been with our country for years, for generations. And we're now at a point of having those hard conversations, those real conversations that I believe will make change. For us in the department, our Civil Rights Division is partnering with police departments across the country to ensure constitutional policing, as well as to help build strong communities. Our Community Relations Service is working with a range of stakeholders to resolve conflicts, to promote reconciliation, to help people who live in their own communities begin to heal their own communities. And our Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, we call it the COPS Office, is working in a variety of ways to promote and implement the recommendations from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing to ensure that local law enforcement officers can serve residents fairly, safely, and effectively. And our Office of Justice Programs is providing peer-to-peer resources and technical assistance to local law enforcement and communities. Now, this is vital work. It's ongoing work. And I also know that this is work that all of you here in the League of United Latin American Citizens is also dedicated to advancing. This has been a part of your platform for years. From your own efforts to engage with local law enforcement agencies, to your work to help at-risk youth stay on a path of opportunity and achievement, you are at the forefront of our national initiative to make equal justice a reality for every American. And we will have that reality, and it will come. It will come largely because of organizations like this and the work of the people in this room who are on the ground every day, seeing the conflict and healing it, seeing the issues and speaking to it, and raising their voices to reiterate the call that all of us are created equal. And I know that I can count on LULAC to be in the leadership of that call and that work. I know that I can count on you to be at the forefront of those efforts because you have always been there. As a trailblazing organization committed to breaking down the barriers of prejudice, to building the bridges of opportunity. Now, as you all know, when this organization was established in 1929, Latino Americans were the targets of discrimination in private business and in public life. But in the face of exclusion and dehumanization, at a difficult time in this country's history, your founders stood tall and said, "We are Americans too." Just that action took bravery. Just that statement took courage. This action at a time of hardship and injustice represented such an extraordinary leap of faith that America's promise of liberty and equality could be extended to all Americans. And that faith, that foresight, that vision has carried you through to this day. And you've vindicated their courage so many times over. Because in the decades since their founding, you've helped countless Latino Americans access quality education, access employment, housing, and receive health care. You've marched for Latino rights in the streets and argued for them in the courts. You helped build the framework with several landmark decisions that became the important precedents for Brown v. Board of Education. The causes we work on are joined. You have battled generations of prejudice and demonization bigotry, from the "No Mexicans Allowed" signs that were once common throughout the United States, yes, in America, signs there, to the outbursts of anti-immigrant sentiment that we thought was gone, we thought had been diminished, but it still too often poisons our politics and infects our discourse. But you have always fought to ensure that Latino Americans can fully enjoy their most basic rights as American citizens. And of course, the foundation, the cornerstone, the lodestar of that most basic right is the right to vote. You know and you live the fact that the right to vote is fundamental to the strength of our country, the health of our democracy, and as our Constitution makes clear in its very first words, these United States is a nation built on the conviction that self-government, by we the people, is the surest safeguard of freedom and the soundest foundation of prosperity. And it is the right to vote in free and fair elections that makes self-government possible. Now, of course, in 1787, when we the people became part of our national documentation, it had a much narrower definition, a definition that excluded you, excluded me. As Congresswoman Barbara Jordan so famously said in 1974, "I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake." But now, through courts and change, I'm part of we the people. But it's more than courts, more than change. It's long years of fierce conflict, years of determined struggle that the definition of we the people has been expanded, perhaps most effectively through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, whose 50th anniversary we celebrated just last year. That law is one of the most important civil rights laws of our nation's history. It finally gave the federal government meaningful power to enforce every American's right to vote. And with the stroke of a pen, centuries-old injustices were met with righteous action, and an era of legally sanctioned discrimination was brought to a close. But while the Voting Rights Act was undoubtedly a watershed in the history of America's march toward universal suffrage, we know it was not the end of that journey. We know that we still walk that path. Because after all, it wasn't until 1975 that American Indians and Alaska Natives and Latino and Hispanic Americans were fully included in its protection. It should never have taken that long. There should never have been a delay. But we also know that we still walk that path because voters with disabilities gained protections in 1984 and 1990. while members of the armed forces and Americans overseas received enhanced protections in 1986 and even in 2009, we still walk that path. We still fight that fight, and there's still so much work to do. Because other Americans, our returning citizens with criminal records, are still far too often disenfranchised for years because of their past misdeeds. Yes, we hold people accountable in this country, but we also believe in second chances in this country. We also believe in a participatory democracy in this country. We also believe that everyone is entitled to vote once they've paid their debt to society in this country. We still are walking that path. We still have work to do. And we all know that since the 2008 election, a time of great progress and change and development in this country's political history, there was nevertheless a surge in state bills and laws that would curb access to the voting booth. And of course, 3 years ago, the Voting Rights Act itself, what so many of us for so long had thought was inviolate, the Voting Rights Act itself was significantly weakened by the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder. And it is no doubt that that decision did great damage. It seriously undermined Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which we of course all call the preclearance section, requiring jurisdictions with the most troubling histories of voter discrimination to receive federal approval or preclearance before they could change their election rules. And Section 5 was in so many ways the heart of the Voting Rights Act, because it allowed us to look at plan changes before they went into effect and take action before they cut into the sacred right to vote. And its neutralization was a serious blow, and it has had far-reaching consequences. First and foremost, the Department of Justice can no longer block voting restrictions before they take effect. Now, for example, just in 2011, the state of Texas passed a restrictive voter ID law that requires voters to produce documents that more than 500,000 Texas voters simply do not have. Can you imagine? Produce something that you just do not have. Literally, do the impossible in order to exercise your right to vote. But the Department of Justice took action. 7 federal judges have reviewed this law. 7 federal judges have found that it violates the Voting Rights Act, 3 of them before the Shelby County decision, 4 of them after. And we still have work to do. The case is currently before the full Fifth Circuit with a decision due any day. And we fight on in that case. We press on, we march on, because we still have work to do. But because of the existing Supreme Court precedent, Texas law remains in force while we wait for this final decision. And it's not the only one. Because of Shelby County, other states have also enacted laws that restrict voting rights. In a time when we should be expanding our democracy, expanding our electorate, laws are seeking to restrict the most precious right that we have. And these laws have the potential to distort elections by making it harder for voters, especially low-income and minority voters, to access the ballot box. Now, Shelby County had other consequences as well. It has forced the Justice Department to rely much more on local groups and individuals to alert us to potentially unlawful acts, since the jurisdictions no longer have to self-report. Now, in the past, we've also relied heavily on election observers. Election observers, specially trained individuals, authorized to enter the polling locations and monitor the process to ensure that it lives up to its legal obligations. But unfortunately, our use of observers is also tied to the preclearance coverage formula that was found to be unconstitutional in Shelby County, and so our ability to deploy them has been severely curtailed. Now, rest assured, we will continue to monitor elections to the extent that we can. We will continue to monitor elections to the extent that we can. But because of Shelby County, we will be sending out fewer people with fewer capabilities this November. Now, the kind of harm that we see in places that pass the restrictive laws that we now spend years fighting on the back end instead of preventing on the front end, the harm that comes when we don't have the same number of eyes and ears in the polling locations that we did before cannot be undone. This is significant harm. This is real abrogation of rights. And here and now in 2016, in America, it should not be tolerated, nor does it have to be. It does not have to be, because in its ruling, the Supreme Court also made clear that Congress has the ability to establish a new system for determining which jurisdictions are subject to preclearance, a step that would restore Section 5 to its full effect and restore our capacity to protect. And I have repeatedly urged Congress to embrace this opportunity. And today, once again, I call upon the People's Branch to stand up for the people's voice. In a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people, no eligible citizen should be denied the right to vote, no matter who they are, no matter where they live, no matter their age, no matter their level of ability, no matter how far away they are from a polling place, no matter what language they speak. No one, and the representatives of the people, should guarantee that right. Not tomorrow, not after the election, but now. Now. They should guarantee that right now. But the good news is that even without Section 5, the Voting Rights Act remains a potent tool, and we are mining it for all the opportunities that we can, as other provisions remain in effect. And there are many other important voting rights laws that our Civil Rights Division is using to ensure and to widen access to the ballot. We recently entered into an agreement with the state of Alabama to ensure their compliance with the National Voter Registration Act. That's the act that requires states, to provide eligible citizens with the opportunity to register to vote through the motor vehicle agencies. Because of course that is where so many people interact with government. And our action there eased the way to vote for the more than 1 million Alabama residents who interact with their state DMV annually. And we've also made certain that communities in Virginia establish polling places for voters with disabilities. We've secured access for Latino voters in Napa County, California, to the Spanish language ballots and assistance to which they are legally entitled. Legally entitled. And we have also worked to ensure that the uniformed service members, our brave men and women who are deployed at home and abroad, are able to send in their absentee ballots in plenty of time for them to be counted. Because the men and the women, our sons and daughters in so many cases, who are fighting to defend our rights should never be denied theirs. And when others bring cases, when others enter the fray in courtrooms and litigation across this country, we join those fights as well. Since the beginning of 2014, we've filed briefs and private lawsuits in 14 different states that address issues ranging from district lines and registration opportunities to ID rules and language access. And as we prepare for the first presidential election since the Shelby County ruling, we're mobilizing all of the resources left at our disposal to monitor that process as thoroughly and effectively as possible. And let me commit to you now, as the Attorney General of these United States, we will continue to advance these efforts. We will continue to fight this fight. We will continue to walk this path. But my friends, we cannot move forward alone. We will be leaning on our comrades in arms. We'll be leaning on our fellow soldiers in the fight. We'll be leaning on you. We will be needing you more than ever to be our eyes and ears in the field and in the communities. We'll be leaning on you more than ever to alert us to irregularities in the registration or voting process. And we will be leaning on you more than ever, not just this organization, but all Americans, not just to defend the right to vote, but to exercise the right to vote. We'll be leaning on you. Because, my friends, even as we challenge the laws that would disenfranchise so many of our fellow Americans, we have to ask ourselves why so many of our fellow Americans effectively disenfranchise themselves by choosing not to vote. Little more than half of voting-age Americans participated in the 2012 presidential elections. In the 2014 midterms, the number fell to just 36%, the lowest turnout in 70 years, the lowest turnout in 2 generations. As President Obama has said, even if we dismantled every barrier to voting, that alone would not change the fact that America has some of the lowest voting rates in the free world. And this is an issue that transcends partisanship. This is an issue that transcends whatever our political beliefs may be, because each of us has an interest in a lively and robust democracy where everyone participates. And I would urge the American people to recall just how precious the ballot really is. Because today, as we sit here tonight, there are still millions of people around the world who can only dream of casting a legitimate ballot. Countless others have wielded that right only to see it crushed by force or stripped away by violence. And though too many Americans have been excluded from the polls for too much of all of our history has also brought us heroes who gave so much to tear down those obstacles, who gave so much to end those injustices, and who gave so much to challenge these United States to make good on the promises set forth in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. My friends, we stand on the shoulders of those who fought and died for that right overseas and here, many of them before this country fully recognized them as citizens. Many of us here tonight are the children of those who marched and who bled to enlarge that right here at home. So many tried to silence them by force. How can we silence ourselves through inaction? We cannot do that. We must not do that. We owe it. We owe it to our ancestors, we owe it to our colleagues, and we owe it to our children to never silence our own voice. Because our votes do so much more than just select a candidate or choose a leader, although they do that as well. But with our votes, with the steps that we take and the ballots that we mark, we reaffirm our commitment to one of our most basic convictions as Americans, the idea that each of us can and should make a contribution to our common life, the view that one person's voice is as worthy as the next, the view that each of us, every single one of us, owns America, and that in the final analysis, we are all created equal. And when we live up to that, when we act on that, when we take that step, when we go to the polls early on election day before we go to work or school, when we stand at the polls with our fellow citizens, when our turn comes, when we take our children into the voting booth with us, and when we step forward and we mark that ballot, we do so, we take that action, we make that stand, not as Democrat or Republican, not as rich or poor, black or white, Latino or Asian. We take that step as Americans. We make that stand as Americans. We cast that ballot as Americans, diverse in our beliefs, different in our opinions, but united, one, together in our devotion to this democracy. It's written on our seal, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now today, as we gather together to reflect on the tremendous gains that we have made, but also to chart our course forward, let us remind ourselves that we're stronger when we act together. We're stronger when we act as one nation and as one people. Let us choose to honor our privileges and to meet our responsibilities. And let us resolve today, tonight, in this moment, not only to defend our most basic right as Americans, but to cherish it, but to honor it, and to exercise it in the protection of liberty, in the defense of democracy, and in the pursuit of justice. So, my friends, let me end as I began by thanking all of you here at LULAC who have fought this fight for generations, who have fought this fight and brought it to the present day and are fighting it for all of our children. Thank you for working to safeguard the right to vote throughout your entire history. And more than that, thank you for always challenging our nation, for holding up a mirror to democracy so that we see ourselves truly, fairly, clearly, and that we can be more open, more inclusive, and more equal. We need you. We admire you. And tonight, I'm so pleased to be able to honor you. And I want you to know that this Department of Justice will remain your ally, will remain your partner in this work, the work that's driven our progress in the past, that animates us in the present, and that promises to help us realize a brighter future for us and our children. Thank you for letting me spend a few minutes with you tonight, but thank you so much for your commitment to the cause, your commitment to the work, for your commitment to America. Thank you, and good night.